Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Mark Larson, Superintendent of Schools, and in the back corner over here, Gray is videotaping this. We'll be putting this online hopefully very soon. Also, those of you who are keeping track with your smartphone or a laptop or whatever it is that you have with you, the slides for tonight's forum are already online. You can access them under the news and announcements. That's on the right-hand side. There are a handful of other people that I want to announce tonight or introduce as well. This is Rochelle Manners. Rochelle's our business manager, and she'll also be taking care of some of the slides and will also be being around to answer some questions. We have some of our school board members in attendance. Kathy Dalton is right here. One of our board members, Kevin Donovan, is also one of our board members, is right here. And then Lucy Payne is, there we are, Lucy, great. So thank you everyone for coming. We're going to be really working hard to get done by 8:30. There's, I think, 14 or 15 slides, so there'll be plenty of time for questions and comments. And so please, if you haven't had a chance to get up and grab a sheet to write your question down or get some of the other information, please do so. A couple other things is that this is a good crowd by all means. We had a really huge crowd the last time, and the first two times were also really large. The last meeting we had here, there was a moderator, and one of the things that was really positive about Eric's his name, he was free, which was great, about civility and kindness. And so we're going to try to get through the slides and get into questions and some comments and some answers and all that. But when we have a conversation that's filled with respect and civility, we go a lot further. So we're urging that again tonight, and we'll try to stay on the topic because people came here to talk about identifying potential budget cuts for 2015-16. That's not next year, but the year after. So that's why we're here tonight, and we'll stick to this topic. If you have other questions or comments, we have our contact information on here. Our contact information is at the end, I guess. But we'll leave that on the screen for a little while so that you'll be able to contact either Rochelle or me. You can phone call if you'd like, but emails I get much more emails than I do phone calls, and so it's probably the best way to go. There are the forms over here. They're going to be for the front, and so we'll ask people to get those if they have a question. And also, if you want to have a contact follow-up question, please let us know that and we'll get back to you, depending upon how you want it. If you want to contact back with email, we'll do that. If you want to contact back with a phone call, we'll do that as well. We're talking about the budget for 2015-16, so that's not next year, but the following year. But some of the history of the district is that we've made budget cuts in 9 out of the last 11 years. The 9th year, last year, we deficit spending. So we didn't make any cuts, but we did spend out of our deficit. But 9 of the last 11 years, we've made budget cuts totaling almost $6 million, about $5.9 million in cuts every year. This is the general fund operation by year, and I want to draw your attention to a couple of things on this. The first one is that the revenue is up on the top. Now, the actual is 2012-13. That's the audited numbers. Those are on the website. The revised budget of 2013-14. We've been doing these presentations for a little while now. This number is a little bit different than the other ones because the school board gets the revised budget. It's usually in January, but we wait until after we have the teacher's contract settled. We didn't settle that until April, and then the board approved it on April 10th, the revised budget. So if there's a little bit of a change, that's why that's happened there. And then the projected budget for 2014-15, that has also changed a little bit. That's because you take into account the settlement that's happened. And so if those numbers seem a little bit different than they were, they're a little different. Not much, Rochelle?
Well, it's mainly due to the sale of Wildwood, of course, maintenance, but this number here, the unassigned is much different than it was.
Okay. And thank you for saying that. I forgot that. The sale of Wildwood Elementary, that was $500,000. That was recognized in that year as well. So I forgot that. Thank you. The expenditures, if I can draw your attention to that line. The actual $32.6 million. Then in 2013-14, 33.6. So it's about $1,100,000, almost that much increase each year. This next year for 14-15, it's $34.4 million. It's about $800,000 more than the previous year's budget. That's because the school board acted to reduce the budget by the expenditures by almost $500,000. So $488,000 was taken out of the expenditures for the projected 2014-15. And that still leaves a deficit of $763,000. This slide here indicates what basically is the cost of doing business. Every year, our contracts increase by about $600,000. As you can tell, this isn't an exact number. So it's about right in that area. And then we also have our health benefits. These are the contracted benefits. I said health, but it's also other benefits in there from dental. It's mostly health, but dental, and I think there's some other insurance and some other things in there. That's about $200,000, and then the others. And these are purchase services, supplies, and equipment. So every year, it's about $1.1 million of extra expenses. And this here says where the general fund monies are going to. If you look at the light green part, you may not be able to see that number up there, but that's 58% of our general fund goes in salaries. And then the second largest number is the benefits, which is 20%. The 12% down below is called purchase services. And those are things, transportation is probably our biggest expense in purchase services, but we also have special education expenses, District 916. Those are the big ones. There's some other purchase services expenses in it, but those are the big ones. And then you can see the other ones, supplies and materials, capital expenditures, other, and student activities. Can you trade now?
Actually, you took the last
Oh.
slide, but that's great.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to, Mark, if we could just back up to the last page just for 1 second. One more. What I wanted to point out was this deficit here, or the surplus here. For the actual 12-13, the board actually cut $250,000 out of the budget. But why this ended up as a surplus is because there are some donations that we needed to recognize in that school year. So even though it put us at a little bit of a surplus, that's what happened last year, the actual. The current year budget, the board decided not to make any cuts, but this just, the overage and expenditures went through deficit spending. So that came out of fund balance. What's happening in 14-15 is a hybrid of both. The board cut about $500,000 over the last couple months, and the balance is going to be taken out of the fund balance. So that's where we get this 763 from. I just wanted to clarify that. So if you could bounce forward. This is the fund balance by year, and the board has established in policy an 8% fund balance of an unassigned fund balance, which means that the unassigned fund balance will not get lower than 8% of the total expenditures of the budget. Remember, the budget's about $34 million. So when you look at this, we started last year actual almost at 12%. And with the cuts that were not taken in the revised budget or the current year that we're in, which is 13-14, this fund balance has gone down, and that will be our performance for this year. And we also, because the cuts weren't made 100% out of the 14-15 budget, which has not been approved yet, by the way, but which is coming to the board in June. This is going to get really close to what our fund balance policy is.
I should speak a little bit to the timing on some of these things. The first one is that in June of this year, June of 14, the board will get the projected budget for 14-15. And then usually it's January, they get the revised budget. This past year, they got the first budget for 13-14 in June, the proposed budget in June of 13, but they didn't get the revised budget until after we had settled the teacher's contract, because that's a big expense and that changes how things go. And so that's why this is a little bit later than we've usually had it. One thing that people oftentimes ask about is the unassigned fund balance and the restricted assigned fund balance.
So the unassigned fund balance is really what we can spend on operations for teacher salaries and our general operations of the district. Anything that lands in the restricted or assigned fund balance is things that, from our gen ed revenue, that the state says you have to assign, or they can only be spent on these certain categories. So it may be on staff development, or it may be on health and safety, or operating capital, which is improvement in the facilities, and it can also be curriculum and those types of things. But we have a lot of funds that come in that are restricted, that we have to spend within certain areas, and that's why when we talk about making cuts, we cut it out of the unassigned, because we have to spend these other ones in the restricted categories anyway.
In 2004, we passed a levy for about $1,100 per pupil. And the revenue from that has gone a long way to do a lot of really terrific things. Last year, the levy failed, and if it fails again, then what we'll be looking at is a change in the revenue. Now, the levy that was passed, there's also been some changing in the funding formula, and this gets kind of into the weeds, but basically it's going to be on the website in more detail. But the bottom line is that with the levy, if it fails, the revenues that we will generate will be going from, as you remember from the previous slides, quite a bit. So that we'll have our expenditures, if they remain the same, which we expect them to have a deficit of about $1.9 million. And that's if the levy fails. That means we're going to have to find $1.9 million of budget reductions, increases in fees or expenses or costs or something to raise more revenue, or take from the fund balance. And as you can see, the fund balance has been dropping. So the fund balance is going to be less and less of an option, and it's going to have to be in reducing the expenditures. And then if you look at 2015-16 with a renewal. Now, the renewal is a straight renewal. That means there would be no tax increase. It would generate the same amount of revenue that we had before. But as you know, since we've been making budget cuts in 9 of the last 11 years, 10 including the deficit spending from last year, that you'd see that we would end up only raising about another $400,000 or $550,000 with a past renewal levy, same levy rate. And that would still mean that we'd have to cut about $1.4 million. Or, as I said, you have 3 options when you're looking at a deficit. Reduce expenses, increase revenue, or take from your savings. And taking from the savings is becoming less and less of an option. The last time we went out for a levy in November of 13, we were asking for an additional $330 per pupil. And if that would pass, then the revenue for that would be, as you can see on the far right, almost $35 million. The expenses of about $35.3 million, and then that would mean a deficit of about $283 million. In this particular scenario, if it passed, we would still be looking at some budget reductions, but my assumption would be out of the surplus. So what this means, projected budget shortfall with the November 14 levy failure, shortfall $1.9 million of reduction, projected budget shortfall with the operating level straight renewal, 1.4, and then with the increases before. What the school board will be wrestling with, and that's part of the reason we're having these meetings, is to hear what the community has to say about what programs they value, what programs we don't value as much perhaps. And the idea is that we're going to have to be looking at creating scenarios. If this passes, this is what, if it fails, excuse me. If it fails, this is what it means. If we go out simply for a renewal, this is what it means, or if we get an increase, this is what it means. So the board needs to hear, I need to hear, what are some of the thoughts and thinkings that people have about this. We have one more meeting coming up after this, and it's going to be on May 6th. It's again here at Wildwood Elementary School, and the topic will be information about the proposed November 2014 operating levy. All of our stuff is on the website here. Like us on Facebook, follow Twitter, all that type of thing. And then here's the contact information. We can flip back to other slides if people have other questions, but also I want to emphasize that both of us will take emails. It's just the same email for everybody. It's first name dot last name, and then at Montevideo K12mn.us. Rochelle is spelled R-O-C-H-E-L, so it's not that's an unusual spelling. Okay. Mark Larson, very boring. So that's the information that we have. What we're going to try to do now is take some questions or get some feedback from folks as to what we're thinking about, what thoughts that you have. Now, a couple things on that, if I may. The first one is that we have forums over here that people may have left questions in. We're videotaping this, we're going to be putting it on the web, and so there might be people that don't want to stand up and say, get rid of third grade, or something like that. But so if people don't want to say something publicly, that's fine. You can leave a comment there. You can even be anonymous, and we'll look at it and talk about it. But you can't be personal in nature. You can't say, I hate Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so. They need to be going. It's not about personal attacks. It's about trying constructive conversation about what we can do in each of these scenarios. Because the board is going to be faced with a couple of different choices, but I think the choices are these largely. The first choice is that you want to go out for a levy. And I think no one wants to go through, if you've been through here for some of the other meetings, trying to cut almost $1.02 million, Looking at $2 million, I don't think we want to do that. But one option is to not even run the levy. Okay, so that's an option. I don't think they'll do that. The second option is to go for a straight renewal, and you see what's going to happen if that's the case. And the third one is to ask for an increase. And then if it's an increase, how much? There's other options in between. There can be a 2-question ballot and all of that. But right now, the board needs to hear from the community what are the thoughts that people have about that. So what I'd like to propose doing is, Rochelle, do you want to get the question? What I propose doing is, these are these are the scenarios that they have, and so we need to hear what people are thinking in terms of things that we should reduce, or if there's some things that are so important and so valuable that we should not touch, we should need to hear some of these things too. So, Michelle? This question, why did District 832 increase taxes for 2014? Item B, property tax statement by almost double. This was not voter approved.
On the tax statement, that might be, I'm not sure about looking at that actual statement, but the board last year was able to approve an action that would allow $300 of our referendum revenue to be board approved versus voter approved. So on the tax statement, you'll see kind of changing a switch in those categories. So your voter approved would have actually gone down. Is that right? And the board approved or other levies would have gone up. And I've had that question from a few people already, and that if anyone else looks at the tax, you'll see though, that at the end of the day, I think the percent increase for both of those was only like 2%, right around 2%.
But in terms of specifics? If there are specific questions on your tax statement, you can bring it in and Michelle can answer specifically on that. We have another question here. Larry, if you wanted to speak, on this microphone there, please.
Yep. Larry Lemieux, I'm from Grant. One of the questions I have here, we're sitting in a really nice facility here, and it houses, when you came to our city council, it said 27 classrooms and 675 students. This building is hardly large enough to hold the over 1,000 open enrolled students we have in our district. The taxpayers are stuck for the next 20 years paying for a new building that was, and one of the rubs is that we stuck it on the Baylor sanitation site when the Mattawamkeag comprehensive plan said that Mattawamkeag should have put it in there. So that's one of the rubs that the taxpayers have.
Not true, and we're talking about a budget for
I'm talking about your budget
2015-16.
and your levy coming up. So my question is, if we cut open enrollment down to the 1% that's allowed by the state statute, how much money would our school district be able to save? Because as I've reviewed your budgets and local tax collected property taxes through your audited statements, as open enrollment has increased, so has our local property taxes collected. Reduce open enrollment, reduce our property taxes, and or go down. I know that you were recently down at the state. You're the only one of 334 school districts opposing a legislation notifying students or parents for schools on toxic dump sites. You were down there lobbying it against the fact you're the only one in the state that lobbied against it, successfully killed it on the point that we didn't know how much it would cost to notify the parents of that they're sitting in school exceeding toxic. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Why are you not down at the state lobbying to change the way we fund our students so that open enrolled students levy dollars follow them? That would be a better expenditure. Maybe you can explain how much money Landmark Environmental yourself, your attorney, spent for lobbying against that bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I feel a little uncomfortable answering this because it really has nothing to do with this. I was there at 4:30 in the afternoon. It was on my own time. I know that you made reference to Peter Coyle. He was there not on our behalf. I sat by him because I happen to know him and I found him to be a personal friend. Ken Haberman was glad to do this. As you may know, Wildwood won a Brownstone Award for reclamation of former landfills. And so we're glad to be proud of in this particular site. Being recognized by the State Brownfield Association of being an exemplary school district, being recognized by the Department of Education as being a great place for students, having the Commissioner of Education come on out here, speak glowingly of the school district and the building, having State Senator Karen Housley come on out here and tour the building and just be able to speak in such positive, wonderful terms about the great things that are happening, how pleased she is. She's the Stillwater Senator. She's a senator in Stillwater. Roger Chamberlain, another IR senator, was also here to speak glowingly of the building. So there's a lot of really things to be positive about. In terms of the expense that it cost the district for me to go to the state capitol, the answer was zero. I didn't put in for mileage. I did it after work hours. Peter Coyle was there, and Haberman does it on his own because he's very passionate about schools that are safe, which this is. The other thing on the budget piece, we have this year about 1,000 students that are open enrolled. I think it's 1,001. That would be about $8.4 million in revenue, and we'd end up cutting about a third of our staff, about a third of our programming, and I just don't think that's something that we want to do. If you look at school districts around us that are, or not around us because they're almost much larger, but if you look at school districts that are smaller, about, by a third, you'll see that their course offerings are less than a third. They have about 2/3 the offerings that we have. They have less advanced placement. They have no college in the schools. They do not have the remedial support for students that they have. At the middle school, as you're probably aware, teaming is very, very important. It's like a middle school, it's like a junior high. It's not like a middle school at these smaller places. And in our particular instance, if you roll those numbers through, you'd end up losing students and staff all the way through, so that you'd end up losing your kindergarten, you'd lose 3 teachers, your 3 youngest ones, and then first grade would be another 3 and so forth. So in terms of all the programs that you would cut, all the opportunities for students that you would eliminate, it's just not a wise idea. Any other questions on the budget?
Mark, I'd like to expound on that. You mentioned Senator Karen Housley that came here and Roger Chamberlain. They are also both authors on the Senate floor that author that legislation that state you shall notify parents if they're in a school that exceeds toxic levels. So they actually not only supported that legislation, they actually authored that legislation. And I still would like an explanation why you feel that this is a school that exceeds toxic levels of property do, why you don't feel the parents have that right to know. Doesn't say that they can't come there, they can just simply use that information they gain to make their own decision. I still would like to understand why you are the only school district that came down and lobbied against that, both at the House file.
Here's why. You went and browbeat Dittmer into submission on this thing. Everybody knows it. You've been kicked out of Matt Dean's office because of your behavior there. He will not tolerate to see you.
No,
Housley ended up giving into this and then went to her committee to say, don't support it. Because of all the stuff that you
have.
have.
You're going to tell me Aaron Brockovich was wrong, Bob Balcox was wrong, and I'll send you all the literature that was opening brownfields around the country.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that has a comment on budget reductions for 2015-16? The purpose of the meeting was for 2015-16. Yes, please.
John Hempstead. My question may be more for clarification. In the budget, it talks about capital expenditures, and it's sitting at about 3%. And I'm not sure what the school board has for latitude. Can capital expenditures be used in some of the districts to go after, I'll just say, spend some capital to go after energy efficiencies or any capital projects to, in the long term, save money for further years ahead? Do they have that latitude? And if so, is there anything planned for it?
They do have that latitude, but it would be through this category of capital expenditures. It would be through possibly an energy program, and that would probably, Johnson Controls does a lot of these energy programs and updates efficiencies in schools, but that almost requires a bond from the taxpayer. What this is, this capital expenditure here is for our building improvements and our grounds and stuff like that. So not new construction or big HVAC projects like you mentioned, but just the annual expenditures for upkeep of buildings and maybe a little bit of remodeling.
The district is what's called the C district, SEE, and I can't remember the acronym, Saving Energy something or other. The district has saved hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last decade in terms of energy usage and savings in terms of the lights. In this particular building, the lights, there aren't light switches by the walls, it's set on timers. We believe, this is not the winter to get our baseline, but we thought that the energy expenses of this building would be about 10% higher than Old Wildwood, because Old Wildwood, it was air drafty, is that fair to say? I mean, it wasn't very well insulated. The equipment and the materials that they have now, from the materials in terms of energy efficiencies, and then the air handling units, so much more efficient, so we're expecting about a 10% increase. Our baseline year this year, I'm a little nervous about looking at that. We don't have that information yet, but and also we ran the water. After we had a water pipe freeze, we've been running the water in all of the buildings to make sure that we don't have a pipe freeze or break, so we're expecting our utility bill to go up a little bit. But all in all, we are being conscious of energy conservation and usage as much as we can.
My name's Janelle Reese. We have 4 kids in the district. We've lived here for 11 years. I have a couple comments. First, related to what you're asking about the budget. I heard you were cutting girls' gymnastics in a program of sports from each. I would like to see actually more like cheerleading and that type of thing for the kids. I feel like there's not a lot of school support at hockey games. You're at a football game, you don't hear a band. You're at a hockey game, we've been at several things. A lot of the big schools have a dance, cheer, tumbling thing combined, and it attracts a lot of the kids that aren't playing sports. I have dancers, so that's kind of been a concern in high school to be involved with school. Back to the Spanish thing for a minute. I'm doing some research, and a lot of the top schools in the state have foreign language. I feel like you guys cut that without having input first, and I feel like that was done behind closed doors without anyone even knowing it was being done, and I don't think that was right, and I'm wondering why. I've talked to my family, I've talked to certain teachers, and feel like a lot of times when you guys present all this and say, okay, what do you guys think? Decisions were already made behind closed doors, and it doesn't matter what we say. And I know that you're going to disagree with that, but I've heard from teachers themselves. I also want to know why, this is the first meeting I've been to, I have not been to the other meetings. But I've also, rumor has it, and I'm a normal parent in this community, so this is what other parents are hearing too. We didn't need to necessarily do cuts, because there was something at like a 12%, and once you get to 8%, then you need to cut. So that was my concern. I don't know all the money, dollars, and where all that goes, but that's a huge thing for me. And I feel like there was a huge lack. Go ahead.
You have 3 questions. Can I answer? I don't want to lose sight of the first one.
Okay.
Do you mind waiting right there?
Yeah. No.
The first one I think was about proposal to eliminate athletics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gymnastics and wrestling were the ones that people talked about as being possible to eliminate. That was never a direct thing, like it's going to be gymnastics or it's going to be wrestling. But one of the things that we do have in this particular district, and almost all schools do, is that we subsidize athletics. In our case, we spend almost $900,000 annually on athletics, and then the fees, the gate, and all that makes up close to $550,000. I'm looking at Rochelle to make sure I have my numbers right. So it is a subsidized activity that we have. We have one of the studies that was done. One of the studies that was done was about school size and comparing schools, one school to another. And the cohort group that Maravita used was schools that were about our size, schools that were a lot larger, and schools that were a lot smaller, a couple 300 kids smaller. What we found is that in terms of curricular offerings, we have about the same number of AP and college and school classes as schools that are larger than us. There may be 3 sections of US AP history, and we might only have 2, but the offerings are the same. But when you get down to those schools that are 600, 700 students, they don't have those kind of offerings. So you want to be right-sized at about 1,200. In terms of athletics and activities, the larger schools have more activities, but not more athletics. The smaller schools have fewer activities and fewer athletics. So we want to be at about 1,200. Some students, I wish every kid would only want to come to school because they wanted to learn their English and social and science and math, but who are we kidding? There's a number of students that love the extracurricular, they love the co-curricular, They love either being on the field or in the stand, and it's important to make sure that we provide opportunities for students like that. If we are looking at a really bad spot in which we're going to have to make huge cuts, then we're going to have to be talking about activities as being something to be cut or else as a revenue increaser. So hopefully that's enough on the
Would
first
you
one.
increase costs though? Just,
No, we would not increase costs, but we'd increase fees
right,
for
that's what I'm
families.
saying.
Okay.
I'd rather have you increase fees than cut things. And if people need scholarships at that point, they ask me for it.
One, just before you leave that point, if a student wants to participate in something, we'll find a way to make sure that they can do that. We're not going to turn anybody away because they can't afford it. That's something that we're just going to make sure we do. But fees, that's definitely something that's going to be on the table to discuss. The second one I can't remember.
Spanish or a foreign language.
The Spanish program at the elementary schools is about 1 hour a week for students, and they have that grades all the way up through elementary, through 5th grade. And then at the middle school, students would have 2 quarters, and then 7th grade 2 quarters, and then 8th grade they have an option of either taking a full year or else something different. And then when they get to the high school, they could take Spanish 1 or perhaps Spanish 2 if they had done really well, and move on through that way. Regardless of your programming with Spanish, an hour a week of a world language is not conducive towards language acquisition. It's just not enough time. If the purpose of the program is to develop language skills, that's not the right model. If the purpose is to develop some cultural awareness and that sort of thing, that might be a better model, although I would posit that it's better to get some of the cultural things in a social studies class in terms of in content of what they're doing. I don't know if that answers the
I
question.
agree with you. I feel like I don't want the school to start cutting things that sewing and all that kind of stuff that it looks like it means nothing, but really at the end of the day, it does help the kids. And I guess about the cuts even, I don't think that things should be made behind closed doors and then told and then asked, what do you guys think? What do you want? That is a huge concern out there. And it's been, and I've also heard that you guys are angry that it didn't pass. And it's kind of, we live in a great school where you have great parents that are supporting everything you want and have supported. And now you're kind of like, screw you, and not you, everybody, the whole administration. Well, I've heard it. I've heard we ticked off everyone because we didn't vote for it, and now it's kind of like, well, now, look, parents, now you're going to suffer, and kids are going to suffer. And I don't want to live in a district with that mentality either.
No, if that were the case, though, there would have been more draconian things. For example, Stillwater, our neighbors, if they had failed their levy, they would have gone to a 4-day week. I mean, that's a pretty coercive type thing. If you don't do this, we're going to do that.
Okay.
The second thing you had was about the fund balance, I think. Right, about that?
12%. Why are you cutting when you really don't need to cut? Because if we pass this levy, why aren't you just calling it a day and leaving things as is?
A couple things on the fund balance piece. This slide indicates that we had about 12% fund balance right here. This was from 12-13. That was the actual, and so we did take from that and did not make any budget cuts one year. We took from the fund balance, so we didn't have to make any budget reductions. And so you can see that it dropped. Then the other part of that is about the levy piece. And that's this slide right here. And if it's a straight renewal, the income that we'll have is only about $500,000. Only $500,000. $500,000 is a lot of money, but it's only $500,000 and $33 million, so it's not that much. We would still be ending up cutting if it's only a straight renewal of funding. And so if you take money out of the fund balance, you spend it that one time and then that's it. You can't spend it again, obviously, because you've spent it that one time. And then you can build that down, spend that down, but then it's gone. And there's a couple other things that Rochelle can speak to in terms of what's happening, what happened in this district in 2006 and 2005-06, when we had to borrow money.
So if we can go back to that slide, Mark, it's just with the 12% here. So reasons to have a fund balance. We had, a few years back, we had 2 years of no increase from the state. Actually, the first year of that biennium, we had a negative 8% from the state. Very uncertain times at that time. The feds decided to step in and backfill that with stimulus dollars. So it ended up to be a zero net effect on the state increase. So number one reason, uncertain times with the federal and state funding. The second thing is cash flow borrowing. If we have a tax shift at the state level, even, let's just say 10%. We have gen ed revenue of 25 million. If that shifts 10% in any year, that's about 2.5 million. So, and remember, we can only affect unassigned here. So 2.5 million of this could potentially be so that we don't have to borrow cash. And if we borrow cash, there's the expense that comes with it. That to borrow 2.5 million, it could be around $65,000, $70,000, which is a teacher's salary, a clerical salary or two, and it means something. So we don't want to borrow cash. That's a reason to have it. The other thing is for unexpected enrollment trends. If we would drop off on enrollment, or if we have unexpected expenditures that come up. That would be the third reason to have a fund balance. Now, the debate is whether to have an 8% or a 12%. And the board has had some discussion about this. And really, the 8% really doesn't cover everything that I just talked about. So, you know, to edge up a little bit, that's the current policy, which is not a real high fund balance policy for any district. And if you look around at some of the other schools, they're higher than that.
Thank you. And you mentioned something about closed doors and anger, and I could speak to both of those. One of the things that I am a little bit angry about is that schools are treated as a participatory democracy, and that's different than a representational democracy. City councils are a representational democracy. So your city council, they could have a huge fund balance, let's say over 80%, and then the 5 of them can say, we're going to raise taxes, and they could just go ahead and do it. I'm not saying that's what they want to do, but that's something that they can do. In schools, if you want to spend money to help children learn, you have to have a participatory democracy in which you have to go out to the voters. And so I think that's kind of an unfair system. I'm a little bit angry about it. I think that either city councils, state governments, and school, all elected officials all elected bodies should be treated the same, and they're not. So I am angry about that, because I think it doesn't make sense. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. The second thing is behind closed doors. I've been doing budget stuff for a long time, and I have yet to see a time in which it's not extremely divisive and it pits people against each other. The secondary people think that there's unnecessary waste at the elementary. The elementary think there's waste at the middle school. There's a lot of finger pointing all the way around. And it was very important to me that we don't have staff and teachers and principals and families fighting against each other. Rather, the way to bring people together is to give them a common enemy. And so if the recommendations come from one person, the superintendent, then that's the focal point of the anger. Then the elementary teachers aren't mad that, well, why'd you decide to cut Spanish? Is it because of the high school people? Or any of those kind of things. It takes that out of there. And so, while there's some pluses to doing it the way I've suggested, it doesn't have the animosity, it doesn't have the divisiveness, it doesn't have the rancor, it doesn't have the transparency. And that is the downside to that. And so today, what we're hearing here is trying to get some ideas about what are some things that people value. And what I'm afraid happens is, in a lot of these instances, is that everybody values everything. And that's really a tough spot to be in, because all these things are great. But as we're spending down, we're going to have to make some hard decisions, and we're going to have to decide what is the most valuable. And the school board has had a large philosophy about what is the most valuable thing. And the most valuable thing, and I think almost everyone would agree with this, is that interaction between that teacher and that student, that classroom. And that's been the highest value. But when you look at other issues, like for example, let's say custodial. Well, custodians don't impact kids directly, they're not teaching them. Well, but if they're not cleaning the rooms, then that falls on the teachers and the kids more, and then that makes their life more miserable or more difficult. And so everything affects everything else. And it'd be nice if it was just something that you just say, we're going to drop this thing and that's the end of it. And we'll save all the money that we need to. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. And so that's why we're having these things where people can come together, share some thoughts and opinions, and hopefully we can come up with some good ideas. Because the stuff that we've come up with, the first time we had one of these presentations, it was about $1.6 million of reductions. The board said, let's take some of these things right off. Nope, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. And then those things went away, and then we're left with about $1 million, and then we further whittled that down to about $500,000. And so the rest of it's coming out of the fund balance. But that also has the cost. The other thing on the expenditure piece that I did want to say is that if you don't spend the money, you don't spend the money this year and next year, because there's a compounding effect to it. And so as you go out, and one of the things that we had in terms of our presentation tonight was going down 4 or 5 years down the road, what would happen and what it would look like if we didn't pass the levy, where would it be? It becomes really difficult to do that because you make so many assumptions, but we'd be in what's called statutory operating debt. We'd be looking at millions and millions of dollars of budget reductions every year once we get 3 years out. It would just be a horrible thing. But it gets complicated when we get into the weeds, as I just did now. I'm sorry, I don't know if I answered all your questions. I went too long, probably.
Sorry, you're fine. You're fine. I just feel like everyone was really uneducated, and you don't even have to, I just feel like this district has given everyone money when they need it, and I, myself, and I think most of the people are more than willing to do that. You need to tell people exactly what you were doing if it wasn't passing, and that was not done.
No. You're absolutely right on that. There was no specifics laid out. There will be this time, and that's why we're gathering people, so that by the end of this process here, I'm hoping that we can say to the community, a no vote means no this, no this, no this. A yes vote means yes to this, yes to this, yes to this. Because I think that's what we have to do.
Teachers, do they get, they're the ones that do this job for us, and they're the ones that know really what matters and what they need. So are they talked to privately, are they told, are they?
One of the nice things about the teachers is that people have not been hesitant to give me advice from the teachers when they're around in the buildings. But we have held some meetings, but not enough. We'll hold some more. They're tough meetings. People aren't quick to point to colleagues and say, we don't value your program.
Thank you.
Sorry.
My name is Amy Christensen Bruce. I have one child here right now. And I just have a couple of, I'm not going to stand up here and say I know the answers, obviously everything's simple, but I have a couple concerns and just a couple of questions of how things work. One of the questions I had in the slides was that of the budget, I think it was 50% of the budget went towards teacher salaries and then another 20% went to benefits. And what I'm wondering, just because I have a background in HR, is every year are you looking at your benefit packages and comparing them against what's being offered? It's probably happening every year, but I just wanted to ask if that's happening. Are you being competitive with other school districts? Are you being over competitive with other school districts? Are there opportunities there at all?
The first thing is that salaries, that's for everybody. That's not just teachers, that includes custodians,
Okay.
superintendent benefits, same thing.
So are you going out to market and making sure that you're treating people or paying people appropriately with what the market's doing?
In the health insurance thing.
Health insurance, gun insurance, all that
Yeah.
shopping around for benefits. and-
We do. We work with an insurance broker on the health insurance, and we visit with them periodically to see what our claims are and what those rates are, and along with that, what is the package and what changes would happen from year to year. And if there was ever a big change or a decrease in aggregate value, we would bring an input and it would be a vote amongst the groups. So we do, I think we're pretty competitive with our benefits. I know we have a really good plan, health and dental wise. As far as salaries, that comes up every 2 years, and that's negotiated, and that there's comparisons done. And Montemita is right in the middle of the metro schools and teacher salary. We're not high, we're not low. But if you take the light districts like us, and if you take all of the metro, we're actually a little bit on the higher side. So, but if you compare this district to schools that perform like we do out in the west, more western suburbs, then we're right in the middle. So every year that's revisited, not only with the teachers, or every 2 years, but with all the other groups too, with the clerical, custodial, and professional.
I just want to make sure the salary benefit surveys will be completed, benefit shopping is being done. There's a lot of, it's not just, it would be just school districts, it would be companies that benefits are being cut everywhere kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know if we were at least looking at what we could do to save costs there and benefits.
And we do, and to keep the premiums down, not only for the employer, but there's a share for the district too. And with the Affordable Care Act, with the regulations that are being imposed and those choices that are available and the fees that we may end up paying, we're looking at even with more scrutiny in the last year or two, and then continuing.
Okay.
You have any questions?
Oh, yeah, the other thing another couple of just concerns for me, I came here from a charter school. What I'm seeing is a shorter teaching day than I'm accustomed to, and so what I'm talking about is actually increasing the amount of time my child gets in gym, increasing the amount of time he gets in art. He said it every other day, and here it's once a week. And so I don't know why our school day is so short, but it would be something that I would like looked at and considered for future years. And then the other thing is, looking at this year after year after year, it looks like special education is always on the cut list. And I have a special ed child. And so I am concerned that there's no room here for him. And I'm seeing, especially in he's autistic, and I've seen Pat for the ASD specialist in 2009, I've seen paraprofessionals cut, I'm seeing, special education is always on the list, and I'm wanting to know where your kids are going then.
The second question first, we have done a lot of work, and by we I mean Beth Sneed and Lynn Beaker, with what's called Access Grant, Reading Corps, and what's the third one that I'm missing? And Title I and Title II, thank you. And so all those cuts that have been done with that is because they've been replaced with grant money. So we reduced special ed expenditures in that and made up for it with grants. So that's the thing. Title I and Title II are students that are qualified for free and reduced lunch, that are on free or reduced lunch, and so that's a number that actually has gone down in our district in the last few years. But our access grants, we were one of the first ones to get the access grants in the whole eastern side. Alternative delivery services, instructional services. And that grant has funded 6 staff members to help students that are struggling, and so we've reduced special ed costs and added that, because that's a grant money as opposed to a regular general fund type expense. And then the first question, I can't remember what it was. Oh, time. Our teacher day is contractual. They can have only 305 minutes of student contact the whole day, and we're right around 300 at the elementary school. And that's with all the folks in there. The school day at the secondary is 6.5 hours. That's about right in the average of the metro, and I think our elementary day is a little bit longer than most of the metro schools. When you look at the state requirements, our elementary schools are way over the state minimum. Our middle school and high school are right at it.
And getting back to schedule with regard to reading and math, I'm finding the focus here is so strong in reading and math that it's at the expense, I just want to consider when you're talking about it, it's at the expense of specialists that I would like my child to have. And so, for instance, I just received an IEP for him that had him 3 out of 5 days only in reading and math. And my child is a whole child, and I want him treated like that. And so I would like the schedule looked at as part of the budget considerations for the next few years.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I don't know the specifics of the IEP and that, but what I do know is that we are talking about, children who want to run and jump and play and do all those sorts of things, who want to create and invent and discover and do all of that type of thing. But we are really a very, very heavy test-driven educational system. When you look at all the testing that happens at the state level and all the required testing that we have, it's pretty formidable. And we have been doing testing. We do the NWA MAPS test, we do the MCA tests. There's a lot of testing that happens, and the NWA is not state required, but the MCAs are. And so we do a lot of testing. You're absolutely right.
But can you do well on those tests and also treat the child as a whole child instead of having them just as a reading and math child? That's something else.
And that's a good point. Yeah. Right.
Lori Marshall, thank you for the opportunity tonight for the community. One of your charts showed that with the levy increase, maybe I'll wait for you to look through that one right there. Thanks, Mark. That even with a levy increase of $330 per student, I'm looking at the deficit in the bottom right column there. How long does that deficit continue, and how long can we afford to run in a deficit? How many years does that go? Is it a 10-year deal? I mean, why not? If you're going to ask for a levy, why not go for one that shows we can break even, run it with a surplus? And is it okay if I sit down and take notes?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a really good question, and the reason that this isn't a deficit is because this is the worst case scenario. This is a very conservative model. So what we've done with the revenues here is only increase the gen ed revenue, general education revenue, by 1%. Do we think that we'll get more than that? Yes. The probability is that we'll get, if not more on the percentage, some other type of revenue that will help schools. But I don't know any business manager that goes in with something other than either a 0 or maybe a 1 like I've done here, because you never want to overestimate your revenue. So if this, the negative, I wouldn't let this throw you off too much, because I think that there'll be something here, but I'm not going to plan for it. And so that might mean that if it comes to pass, if that is what the next biennium has for us, then this would have to change. If the 330 would have to go up, if we indeed only got the 1%. But this is a very conservative model, and that's the way we've always budgeted.
The question for 10 years out.
Oh, at 10 years out, so when we go to look at this, and we do want to run it out and do inflationary models, that's beyond the scope of the discussion tonight, because this is just the one snapshot picture of what 15-16 would look like with these 3 options.
But to that point, if you're talking about, we've used this number for expenditures, and the expenditures are continuing to rise. Sorry for pointing at this screen. The expenditures are continuing to rise like that, so we're also expecting them to go up about another $1.1 million, and that's based on these factors that we have right here. And so with that in mind, what happens is that if you play that out all the way through, then you're going to continue that expenditures are going to get larger and larger. But these are assumptions. Now, is it possible that everyone would take a voluntary, freeze on salaries? Yeah, it's possible. Is it possible that all of a sudden we won't have any health insurance costs? Yeah, the fact is that these are also probably very likely to occur. Might they get better? Yeah, they might. But right now, for the modeling, we project it out to be either flat revenue, or else just a slight increase in our expenditures to be historically what they've been. Now, on this slide here, the expenditures, if you make a reduction of expenditures, then you don't spend it this year, obviously, but you also don't spend it the following years. So if, for example, you all of a sudden decided not to have 3rd grade, and then so you would save the cost of 8 teachers, that would be an expense that you would not have this year, and you also would not have it the following year, and the following year, and so on. I'm using that as an example. I don't mean to imply anything about 3rd grade. But the point that I want to try is that if you don't have that cost, then you don't have it. And that's a compounding effect as you go through on your modeling. Likewise, if you don't make an expenditure reduction, then you spend it, and then you can spend it again the next year. And so that it becomes a compounding multiplier effect, so that the revenue is not going to keep up, and that gap's going to get greater and greater, and that means the deficit's going to get greater, which means more drastic action.
Good evening, Phil Watkins, lifetime resident, raised 2 kids in the district. One's just finishing up, one graduated last year. So I'm standing here looking at my property tax statement. It says my home value went up 40%, or 20%, I'm sorry. And the house is 20 years old, I haven't done anything to it. So I don't know mysteriously how that happened. But I guess, I'm looking at this thing in a different way than I've heard here. And we're talking about our concern for kids and all this stuff. And I've been to every one of these meetings. I went to all the meetings throughout the school being built. I did hear clearly that we're building this school because we want to have a great environment for open enrollment kids. Okay? It's something I keep hearing us saying, but that was absolutely clear to them. Okay? I want to make sure that we remember that, this idea of the school was highly, highly, highly pushed one way. Okay? And I feel it's the goal of government. I'm on the planning commission for White Bear for 20 years. I've got a lot of stuff. I run a medium-sized company in Minnesota. We do $100 million a year business with government. Okay, so I deal with this all day long. But anyway, I guess what I wanted to say with this is what we're sitting here and in discussing this stuff, we've got a national debt of $1 trillion a year. Granted, we're in a little bubble year now, so we got that half supposedly, we can't believe much. That's $500 billion for Minnesota if you go by population density, right? All right, and the year that hit its peak in '09, in our state, we decided to give $1 billion stadium to a convent. Okay? That's also the year we decided to build this school. And we had an empty elementary school sitting in Hugo doing nothing in the neighboring district. Okay, so then I'm sitting here looking at this, and I hear us talking about budget. Okay, I want to look at real things that are real expenditures. Okay, because your budget and expenditures rarely have much to do with each other. I purposely, I tell you what, in 35 years of running these companies that I've been a part of, I hardly even look at a budget because it's just a throwing a dartboard, right? So I looked at this sheet here, I looked at your numbers off the website. All right, so if I go back to these years, and I only pulled so many years that I have with me there, but I'm just having a hard time. We talked about 07, 08, we reduced 300 from the budget. But we went up that year $1.6 million from the year before, okay? And our per pupil was $31.30 per. We went up 97, so that's $303,000, right, in money for the extra pupils.
Makes sense.
But we went up 1.6 million, okay? But we went down 300,000 from our budget, okay? Which I gotta say, I don't care what you vote, throw it away, I don't even want to hear the word. Okay, so then the next thing I get to 08, 09. I got $346,000 is basically the amount if you take it, the per pupil, whatever. Well, we went up $5 million, okay? We went up from $29 million, $265 in expense to $34,276,000. Okay, and again, we're bragging about we took $500 off the budget. And I know you weren't here then, so you're not even counting with this. Okay, so then the next thing, we got 09 to 10, and we suddenly dropped to 31 million. Okay, we dropped $3 million in 1 year. Okay, the meeting before when I asked this question, I was told, well, we had to do it, and we did that by changing the period of date. Great, we got creative, right? And we did this thing. And I guess what I'm just looking at is I'm looking at our whole entire deal here. I'm looking at this out of control national debt and spending that's just going out of control. I am very concerned about what's going to happen to my kids. What kind of thing we're leaving them with. Remember that half the people in this voting district did not want this school. Okay, and I am a little upset because this thing was rammed down our throat. Every little desperate measure made to get a vote. When I feel it should have been, here's the information, folks. We can do it, we can't do it. You make a decision and vote. Instead, it was rammed down our throat. You must do this. We have to do it. You see what I'm saying? Is I just don't feel that that was the position of the school district to make that judgment call. They can make a recommendation, but it's really their job to say, here's the facts, folks. Okay, we can do it, we cannot do it. But what I really have a problem with is that we didn't use the creativity. Okay, we changed to a period date. We saved $3 million. That was 9.5% of the total budget. That's more than that whole surplus somebody was asking about in 1 year. Okay. Then again, we go to the next year, and we dropped it, went up only $500,000 and 32.28 per pupil. Then the next year, we jump up again. But we keep talking about this budget reduction, but we keep spending more money. Okay, and I guess the one thing I've asked you guys a couple of times for is, I'd like to see, like what I would call in business, a P&L. Here's what we spent last year, and all the categories we spent it. Okay? Here's where we went this year, and here's all the categories that went up or down, and then manage that. Instead, we're hearing, oh, well, there was this fictitious study done, and it went up 6-7%, whatever. We don't know where it is, where it came from, but that's what we're using to make our budget, which our budget doesn't seem to have a whole lot of value. See what I'm getting at? Is we're still looking for that this year, last year, exactly where did it go, why is it there, and then what can we do with the other districts?
Okay, I think I understand the question. See if I can circle back a little bit.
No, that's fine.
I might go to Rochelle on some of the stuff. I don't know about I've seen the budget book, and there's 3,000 different codes that have this year and last year. Is that right? Okay, I'm sure Rochelle will be happy, or at least willing to show that, all that. In terms of the budget reduction, going from a 7-period day at the middle school to a 6-period day, and a 4-period day at the high school to a 6-period day, did save a lot of money. The money that it saved was in personnel. People lost their jobs, and students lost options. So they still have family and consumer science, they still have art, they still have business, they still have tech, they still have engineering, they still have music, they still have phy ed, but they have less of it. And they have more of the English, social, science, math. And that's the trade-off that you make. When you eliminate options for students, you save that personnel cost. And it was a great savings in terms of amount of money. But that savings does come with a cost, and the cost is options for students. And students don't have as many choices as they have, and they don't have as many electives as they've had in the recent past. And that's actually at the middle school and high school level, less so than the elementary. So that's the first savings piece. The second piece about the budget, I would argue a little bit. I think there's a lot of value in this, and we look at it pretty closely. In terms of the codes that we have, do you want to speak to that? Because it might set your mind at ease with the numbers.
Well, it is about a 5,000 line budget, so we do look at every category. There's a 17-digit code that we follow per the state guidelines, and we look at every object code, which would be salaries. And just within salaries alone, there's 3,000, 2,000 lines. I'm not sure, a lot. And so we do slice and dice it and analyze it that way. But when it comes, at the end of the day, when we're a school district that can't really increase their enrollment, if you can't increase your enrollment, that's what drives revenue. And so you're shifting to the other side of the ledger, the expenditures. So you're always in that cutting mode because there's not a lot of new ways to bring in revenue. That's why the property tax is hit so many other times, because we're dependent on what the state legislatures do in biennium. And that's where our dependency lies. And that's why with the fund balance, running back to that's why we have it, because we've seen in recent history where we've gotten zero. And in a district like this, where we're at capacity or near capacity, your only revenue source is not there anymore because you're tapped out.
Right, but as our home values are going up and up,
Mm-hmm.
and they try, they want to get everything up as high as they can. I mean, I guess, when I go back to kind of what we're looking at from a whole country and state here is, we used to, I remember getting my first job back in the early 70s, and it was, sales tax of 3%. And now we can't even get by at 8% or whatever. And yet all the numbers are gargantuan. What I'm saying is we keep, why were we able to do all these things and then we just keep going up and up? And that's what I guess I'm looking at. Somebody here was saying, well, what about, how are you going to do this when you're not going to hit your number because you're targeting a bad place here because you're going to start using into your savings? Well, I'm looking at that and I'm going, well, if our values are going up and you guys are a percentage of that, okay, then you're obviously, you guys are supposed to be funded based off a percentage of home values. Okay, so if the percentages are going up, which I'm looking at mine went up a heck of a lot this year or next year, I mean, that's why I have a problem with asking for more money from us when all I can see is it just keeps going up, 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 and up. And you guys already have it built in. Okay, you have an inflation built in based off of these values going up. And if I look at it, your revenue is going up and your expenses are going up every year. But yet we keep talking about this crisis coming, and I'm looking at it going up, man, if I could get 10% price increase on my business, I'd be happier than that. You see what I'm getting at? And that's what I guess I'm looking at, is that I see this, and I don't know. I know it's been brought up at a couple of the other meetings, and yeah, okay, I've got 5,000 lines or whatever, but normally that gets broke down into maybe 20 for payroll or 10 or something, but anyway, I don't want to beat that one to death. I guess one of the other things that I've been seeing is somewhat of the culture that we're putting together here, and I've heard this, half of all kids that go to college don't graduate, the other half that do don't get a job in their, what they went to school for. So I'm looking at that and saying, okay, 1 out of 4 kids ends up being a success. And yet we have this goal, I looked through the little thing at my son's graduation, and, you know, I think the kid would have been scared to death not to say he was going to college and, you know, what my plan was. You know, I get a little concerned about what we're targeting. I mean, I'm hearing all this crying about Spanish and all these things, which is fine. My daughter loves her Spanish class, okay? But I'm sitting here trying to hire mechanics. I put a job out for a mechanic for $80,000 a year, and I will get 1, maybe 2 responses, okay? Great job, keeps you healthy, you're active all day long. We put an ad out for an office manager for $10 an hour. I get 2,000 applications, and they've all been in college and all this stuff, right? We hired a human resources person. We had to shut the ad off after 5 hours. There were so many applicants. But what I guess I'm looking at is where are we going and trying to target some of this other stuff other than just the mainline academic stuff? Because, you know, I don't see these other schools that I go to, and they have auto mechanics programs and things like that, and we go in and talk to them, and here it's just not even on the radar.
You're right, it's not on the radar at Monongalia High School. What's happened what happens is students basically what I call vote with their feet. Our classes, for example, our business enrollment has dropped rather precipitously. Our engineering classes have risen really pretty dramatically, quintupled in the last 5 years. But business has gone down, family and consumer science has dropped. Classes, students are deciding what they want to vote for by going and signing up for that class. I'm talking mostly high school now. The other thing is that at one point in time, I did have an auto maintenance type class. We also had a small engine repair class. We also had a welding and iron foundry type class. Students aren't signing up for those things, and so when students don't sign up for them, they fall by the wayside. And what we've seen is that the students at Mahtomedi are very much interested in engineering. The classes that they're taking in that are really pretty remarkable, and the things that you see students doing are great. It's a different world. In terms of students who want to have a passion for auto mechanics or some of the health-related careers or fields, we do have some students that go to District 916. They have some of those options. But most of our high school students stay in the high school. The high school is a great building. They want to be there. And we can't force them to go out there and take those classes and get that really high paying and, you know, very skilled, highly skilled professional job if they don't want to do that. We largely offer what the students will take. And so that's where those electives are. So I'm not sure if that answers that.
Well, it does. I mean, I just have seen, you know, and I gotta say, one thing I was just absolutely shocked about was standing there at the commencement for my son. And, you know, we recently, before that, had this deal where we pluck the cream of the crop kids from these other school districts with open enrollment. Then we run around and brag about we're number one, we're boards, we're the greatest. You know, then I hear, you know, at the commencement that, you know, these kids have got to be very proud because they're part of the 1%. I mean, I just walked out the door. I was so upset when I heard that. Okay. The next thing that goes along with all this is, you know, as we're building this culture and we're telling our kids that you're a loser if you don't go to college, and we're pumping it into the parents and the social structure of this community, I'm getting concerned that some of these kids are going to be set up for failure. Because it's one box or nothing. And that's all I feel. My son graduated from here. Thank God he's done really good. He did not go to college. He had a great full-time job, and I'm very happy about it. Okay, but, you know, I guess I'm just trying to throw that out there that, you know, I think you guys would have a lot more success with the community if you would recognize that half the people didn't want this school. There is a half that are very concerned about where the country's going, spending money, including the school district. We're not all done. I manage a budget 10 times the size of the school district. And I would never, ever, I wouldn't even keep my job a week if I thought like this. Okay? I have to respond in a week to things sometimes, huge things. And you got to wheel and deal and right away go and take things apart and dice them and say, hey, what's good and what's bad? And you're held very, very accountable immediately. But, you know, when we've got, like I say, you've got increased revenue coming from all this growth of all the values of homes around here and all that, just like everything else in government, to be here talking about this and then at the other hand building this culture that's just, it's almost like we're sitting here, I feel like the school board is just trying to say, hey, look at us. You know, we are the #1 school district, we're the #1 this, and I'm a part of it, so yay. You know, somebody was talking about not going to the things and hearing a band at the sporting events. My daughter loves band, but she was very upset this last fall when she was forced to go and play at pep band on Friday night. You know, she's stressed out from working on 100 other things and being a good student, and then she's told she has to go and play at pep band on Friday night. Well, you know, then I hear things like, we want to, you know, be like the U of M or whatever. I'm like, are we thinking we're that already? Anyway, I don't know if you understand, I've gone on a little.
I think if I may kind of put a finer point on it, I hope, you spoke a little bit to culture.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm very proud of the fact is that our students achieve great things. They go on to do remarkable things. On the Celebration of Excellence, we'll recognize a couple of distinguished alumni that graduated from Alameda schools and have done terrific, amazing, wonderful things. We want to embrace that. We want students to have, let me speak personally, very personally for my own self. The thing that I wanted for our kids was to have options and to have choices, that they could do what they wanted to do. If they wanted to go to a college, great. If they wanted to go to a two-year college, fantastic. If they want to do whatever it is, we want them to have options. And we want to provide our students with options and chances to be successful. And the best way we believe to do that is to make sure they all have at least a minimal competency of skills. They need to have a minimum skill set. But that's the floor. The MCA tests, the NWA tests, all that stuff, we believe that's our floor, not our ceiling. Other places, that's what they strive for. And they think they're doing the best they can if they get to that point. For us, that's a floor. We want all students to be at that point because if they're at that floor, then they can go where they want to go. And they can realize their own aspirations. And aspirational thinking is a key thing for students. It goes along with grit and perseverance. And so we want to have a culture where students can achieve. We want to have a culture where students have a core of basic skill, of success that they can go and grow and do as much as they can. So that's the culture that we want to have. And is it competitive? Yeah, I think it probably is. Are there people that are stressed out? I'm certain that there are. Your daughter is probably a great example of that. But the fact is that we want to have a school district that gives students their best chance to be successful, because we only get them 1 year at a time, and we only get them 1 day, and tomorrow we got to make that a great day for those kids. We got to make sure that they are able to learn and grow as much as they can. And that's why we have the best teachers around. That's why we're so proud of how well we do with the school, the students do in the school. All of those things are really important. The other thing that you mentioned, not about culture, but about options and so on. When you have to make those tough budget cuts, limiting the options, those are the things that happen. And what I'm hearing tonight is that there's a lot of things that are really valuable. And I'm getting a lot of conflicting things, that we want to have more of this, we want to have more of that, we don't want to have less of this. Well, when you're in a situation where we are, as all school districts are, we're going to have to make tough choices, and that becomes difficult. The final point, and I think you were getting at this with some of the comments about not knowing what we're doing from year to year. These numbers are soft. They're pretty much about like that. We've had contracted agreements that we'll have these teachers starting July 1st through June 30th. It's not a private sector thing where people are at-will employees. They're with us for that time. And so they're contracted for that. We've entered into contracts with their benefits and so on. So it's a slightly different model. We're not nearly as nimble as private industry is. And then the final point about taxes and so on. Matamidi, while great with wonderful housing values, does not have a lot of businesses, does not have a large business tax base like other districts around us. And that does hurt us in terms of some of the taxing. Is that fair to say?
Well, I guess, the other point is just, I think it's important, like right away your response was, hey, we have these great kids. Okay, we also have a lot of kids that a couple years out of high school, I know quite a few of them in this area, they graduated here within the last 2 years, and they're not in college, and they're not doing well. And I feel for those kids. And I end up kind of hanging out with some of these kids once in a while, there's some things that I volunteer with and do things. And I guess I just want to make sure that we've got our mind clearly on making everybody a winner, and not just that top 1%, and that we're not targeting to be that. That's not what makes up the country, that's not what has made us successful and prosper over the last 100 years or whatever. And we're in a bad state right now as far as our country goes in finances and everything else. And, we got bridges falling down because we can't even figure out, some of the basics there. And I just want to make sure that is kept under control, and that when we're making plans and we're going forward, that we're doing it together for everybody. And I just want to speak as a guy who, didn't go to college and ended up being a mechanic, but, I raised 2 kids on my own with my wife, and she never worked, and, we're just fine, and it can be done, and I just don't like it, I guess, when I feel that that's looked at as some kind of just undesirable, and that we're promoting it that way, and
Yeah, I wish I could disagree with you about the students coming back, but I can't. There are students that do come back and have found out that college wasn't for them, and it's been a wasted year in some ways for them, and that's a sad thing. They don't get that year. And yet, what we're finding is that the students, when they have options, when they have the choices and the chance to do what they want, when they have that floor of skills, that's when they have the opportunity, and then they can make their life of it what they will. And I hope everyone makes great choices and does wonderful things. But I agree with you. There are students that I shouldn't have done this, I should have done that, and it's.
I'm just talking about the need in society.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Other folks?
Hi, my name is Kevin Oppenheimer, and I have a first grader here at Wildwood and a kindergartner and one next year in Wildwood. And overall, I'm pretty darn happy to be in the Bonavita School District. I feel like good things are happening for my son. Good things happen for him in kindergarten and in first grade here. But one of the things that I will say, and I'm kind of going to contradict somebody previously. My son, when he went to kindergarten, he did half days here, and now it's, that's no longer going to be an option. And there was some talk about having longer school days versus shorter school days, and I kind of feel like schools are trying to fill too much of the gap that parents are leaving. And, I actually feel myself like I'm being deprived of being able to raise my child in some cases. My daughter now is going to have to go to all-day kindergarten next year. We have no choice anymore. And, I understand it's important for the kids that don't have good parental backing. But for those of us parents who are engaged with our kids and are trying to do a lot with our kids, we need that time with our kids. I personally feel that I'm a better person to interact with my kids than his teachers and than people here at the administration. I won't deny that his teachers care about him and whatnot, but we care about him more. And we can't just continue to expand education and take away the role of parents. And, quite frankly, the parents that want their kids in school all day for kindergarten and whatnot, they're being selfish. They really are. In a lot of cases, they don't need that additional income, but they'd rather find their kids out on the school so they can have the dual income and buy a bigger house and all those sorts of things. And that's kind of the model that we're going into as a society. And I know this doesn't directly relate to budget, but in a lot of cases, I'd like to see the school do less and the parents and families do more. I mean, that's the way it used to be.
Yeah, they did. And there were times, I've told this story before, about how Bloomington, Indian Mounds Elementary, my elementary school, made it a point to teach us how to answer the telephone, that they felt that it was their obligation. Imagine, if you can, instead of this with words, imagine it being 4 squares. And if you can just bear with me with this box metaphor. Think of it as being 4 squares. In this square, it's all things to all people. My elementary school was all things to all people. Not only did they teach me how to answer the phone, they taught me how to break. They made us chew those things, and they took it upon themselves to do that. In addition, my high school taught me how to drive. They felt that was something they had to do. All things to all people. Over here, think of this as being all things to a few people. These are your elite private schools. They'll set you up with connections. You'll get gourmet lunches and meals. You'll have internships. You'll have all of those things. There'll be all things to just a few people. And then down below, think of it as being a few things to a few people. And those are like the testing companies, the ACT prep, the LSAT prep, whatever preparation that you want to have. If you're going to take a medical test, the MCAT test, you'll go there and they'll teach you how to do better on that test. And we do have students that take ACT prep classes. They'll pay a tutor to do that. Those people will be a few things, test prep to a few people. And here's where I think we need to be as a school. We need to be a few things to all people. But what are those few things? That's part of the conversation tonight, because we can't be all things to all people. We can't be the parent to all these students. We can't be the provider of every single thing that all the needs that they want, all the needs that they may have, all the wants that they have. We're going to have to be a few things. But what are those few things? And that's what the purpose of this discussion is tonight. And hoping to hear some ideas about, we want to be this, and we don't want to be that, or we want to do these things. And it's really hard, because when you get into that, you get into the values. We value this very, very much. Monterey values engineering quite a bit. The engineering program and what these students are able to do is really remarkable. And the skills that they have and the options that they're going to have are terrific. But it's not for everybody. The fine arts that we have, the kids who are involved in the play that's coming up, passionate about theater, great, great stuff. I think the plays and theater and fine arts are terrific. I think engineering is terrific. I think all the stuff is terrific, but we can't do it all. We're not at a point where we can be all things to all people. We're not going to be all things to a few people like the elite privates. We're not going to be a few things to a few people like the testing companies. We're going to be the few things to all people. And that's what we need to have the debate on and the conversation. And what are those few things? And that's where we are. And that's tough. Because we're getting the values, we're getting the things that people want to have and what they don't want to have. And that's where it's really hard. And so, can we be parents to everybody? No. Should we be? No. Do we care about kids? Can we be the babysitters? We have students here at 6 in the morning until 6:30 at night. We'll have students in here on Saturdays with the, I can't remember what it's called, the MAC Get Active program that we have. It's a free program for families. I mean, we're doing a lot of parenting type things. Is that our role? Probably not. But if not us, then who? And that's kind of the rub about that. And so, you know, should parents do a better job? Yeah, in some instances, of course they should. But in many instances, they're doing the best they can, and we're helping out with that. So I'm sorry I went out a little bit on a tangent on that, but I do want you to think about that as to where we are, because I really think we are going to be a few things. Because we're going to be this way for all students. Whoever comes in our door, we're taking them. And they're all Zephyrs, and we're going to try to help them grow and learn as much as they can. But it is a tough spot to be in. I'm sorry, I went a little bit long. I'm not sure if I ended up the point.
Yeah, just want to make a couple of comments, finance-based. You know, when I've been to all these meetings and I've seen this inflation number. No, it's not one of the slides tonight. It was from a previous meeting when you talked about the inflation, you know, that state funding is not keeping up with inflation, and you show the inflation over the last 10 years, what that percentage was. And a couple of things that I want you guys to keep in mind. You know, state funding doesn't come from a magic pot at the end of the rainbow. That comes from us too, from our pockets as well. And that inflation rate, I can't keep up with keeping your funding at that inflation rate. My salary doesn't go up at that kind of percentage. I'm lucky if I get 2 or 3% a year, and I work for a fairly good company that does give, you know, decent raises. So you need to set your expectations at what people can actually bear too. So keep that in mind when you think about that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And it is going to get to that question about what are the few things that we're going to have to do. Because we won't be able to do it all. We'll be able to afford it all. We won't be able to have people willing to foot the bills on all of that. What I would propose now is a couple of different things. One is our contact information. If you did not get that, you can email Rochelle or me with questions, and if you want to get back with a phone call, just leave that on your information. We can do that. Also, what I would like to offer is that if you have other suggestions that you didn't want to make tonight, and you wanted to send them, put them on the card, and we'll take those as well. And if you have other thoughts that you might want to share, I'm willing to stick around. We can talk for a while if you'd like. And if you have other questions, then Rochelle would be happy to stick around. Michelle will be willing to stick around, I'll be happy to stick around. I also have some of our board members are here tonight that you can also pigeonhole them if you would. I do want to say thank you very much for coming to this. I know a lot of you have been to all of these things, and I do appreciate that. The input that we have is valuable, but we do need more and better ideas. So if you have other thoughts, and if you have friends, neighbors, relatives, that type of thing, other thoughts, please do that. I'm involved with other superintendents, and we have these kind of conversations about what kind of budget cuts would you looking at, what kind of process they're using. There's a listserv that business managers use electronically, but you have friends and neighbors and relatives in other districts. We're happy to take ideas from others as well. Our next meeting is going to be Tuesday, May 6th at 7 p.m. And we'll be talking about the operating levy referendum for November of 2014. No decisions have been made, but the board, as I mentioned, has what I think are four different options. One is to do nothing and then just start making the cuts. The second one is to go out at a straight renewal, which means those things we mentioned before, an increase, and there's also a two-question option. So those are the things that they'll be wrestling with. We need to hear from you as what you think. So I just want to say once again, thank you very much for coming tonight, everyone. And if anyone wants to get a quick tour of the building, if you have a minute, I'm happy to walk you around a little bit as well. But thank you very much for coming. Good night, everyone.